Y'all, Wizard101 is changing Shadow and Hand spells and Scions for literally every school, and today the community received teasers for the Storm spells. So as usual, I'm gonna link the original source of the teasers in the description, so please check them out. But we're gonna be looking at the spell changes straight from Wizard101 that they're going to be applying to Shadow and Hand spells and Scion for Storm today. Starting right off, here's what they're going to be doing to the spell Rusalka. Now, if y'all have been around for as long as I have, you probably already know how many different versions of Rusalka there have been. There's a real chance this might be the final version of Rusalka finally. So what are the major takeaways from this Rusalka change? One, just like every other Shadow and Hand spell that we've seen this week, the bottom path, the one that's allowed in PvP, is no longer 2 Shadow Pit. Now, while that is relevant for literally every school, I would argue that this change is the most relevant for Storm. I'm running what I would argue are some of the best stats for Storm at max level right now, which is 10,000 health and 47 resist. Could you get a little bit more health and a little bit more resist? Sure, probably at the expense of things that you really need anyways, like damage and pierce. But even if you were to, you're still extremely fragile. Almost every school in the game has enough pierce to literally negate Storm's entire resist. As in, without shields, your resist stat literally is not relevant. And 10,000 health, well, yes, it could last you a good amount of time, especially if you really lean into the weaknesses and heals that Storm has. It's rare that you'll ever really consistently get to the point where you're using 2 Shadow Pips in a game. Games literally don't last that long, maybe with the exception of Storm versus Life games. The current version of Rusalka, yes, it hits for 1400 damage, but the 2 Shadow Pip requirement makes it almost entirely unrealistic to use in the vast majority of games. Now, the new Rusalka is extremely different from all of that. The top path, first off, is an extremely powerful hit. I think it's really good for PvE. Obviously, Rusalka's always been Storm's best single hit shad. It looks like they're changing the mechanic from what it is right now, which is it could either give you a guiding light or a damage blade to always a damage blade, but now it's random how good the blade is. I think at least in PvE, it looks like they're trying to like really play up the Storm RNG element. I feel like spells like Wild Bolt, Insane Bolt, Hammer of Thor, and I guess Rusalka, they're all examples of spells by chance can do different things. I think that's the reasoning behind this. Are these spellments worth it? Absolutely. This is an incredible hit. Storm is the best hitter in the game. Now we have spellments to upgrade literally their best single shad hit. But the bottom path is completely different than anything we've seen Rusalka ever do. And frankly, it's not just the fact that it's 1 shad and it's way more usable considering the pacing of Storm. The actual utility is really good. So at max tier, what the bottom path Rusalka does, it does 905 damage, and then for 4 rounds, you get an aura that gives you positive outgoing damage. Now, first off, this aura is no joke. Right now in PvP, or I would argue almost any source of advanced content, the best aura is Galvanic. It's only a 25% buff, and you have the added, liability against mitts of raising your incoming damage by 10%. And I know that 10% doesn't really seem like a lot, but what a lot of mitts will do, because they're scared of the Storm buffing up for a Storm out, they'll buff up for a base Jhin, and because the damage is already in the multi-thousands, you start running into some serious issues with that 10%, because that 10% is worth at least 1,000 of extra damage on you. So what this bottom path Rusalka does, after that 900 damage, it puts an aura on you that is a 40% damage aura without any, negative impact on you. Now, the other thing that's really notable about this outgoing damage aura, it's chromatic. And what I mean by chromatic is, y'all might notice that symbol, and we'll actually see that across this video, so it's good just to know what it is. That symbol just means that regardless of which school the wizard using it is, it'll basically correspond to their school when buffing them or doing anything. In the case of this spell, what this means is, let's say that a fire were to use Rusalka, they would do the same Storm damage. All of the stats that relate to this would still be Storm stats, but the spell would give them a 40% fire damage aura for 4 rounds, not a Storm aura. Now, for Storm, that doesn't really mean much. What this really means, though, is that we have confirmation that these spells are going to be usable across school. Up to this point, we have not had this confirmation. That also means that every spell teaser that we've covered up to this week will be accessible across every school. I think that's something that they'll have to really look into, make sure that it's not a bad idea. We ran into some serious issues a long time ago with cosplaying strategies. And what cosplaying is, you're actually just one school, but you run only the stats of another, and you start running into weird ass setups where you have high res schools like Life and Ice just run Storm damage and offense stats, and then they also have the higher damage per pip of Storm spells, and it was very unbalanced. They had extreme damage damage output, similar to a Storm, with the resistant HP that Storm does not get. Now, when that original problem did happen, what they ended up doing was they made it so that TC shads, which is how people were able to use off-school shads to begin with, became no PvP. But even if they keep TC shads banned, because this says chromatic, the only assumption is you can use spellmans to learn other school shadow spells. That's a big deal. The good news is these new shads are one shadow pip and they're less damage, right? If you're purely using a shad for damage, which was the issue with cosplaying strats before, you would just want to use the 6 pips without a shad with Triton, right? The real value is in that chromatic aura. So I'm hoping that because the damage is reined back a little bit and we're not looking at 1400 damage with the resist and health of an ice with a storm spell, maybe it'll be more balanced, but that is something that could happen as a result of this. Moving right along to what I would argue is the next most used shad spell in Wizard101 for Storm, Glowbug. Now, just like every Darkmoor spell, it looks like we're not getting spellmans to upgrade it. In my opinion, out of all the Darkmoor spells, Glowbug, that's the one that we need spellmans for PvE, because it's just a very, very used spell. Spellmans would upgrade the damage of this. It would be really nice to see the spell doing 1100, 1200 because of spellmans. Much like the 2 shadow pip issue, like, I feel like Storm is very uniquely affected by powerful spells not having spellman pads. That's because their DPP, their damage per pip, it's so high that every spellman upgrade is normally worth at least 20 to 30 damage. For a 5 pip spell that also involves a shad like Glowbug that involves only damage from all the pips, it would be like probably like 50 at least per spellman tier. We're missing out on hundreds of damage because this isn't getting spellmans added onto it. That is a must in my opinion. But what they're doing with the version of Glowbug that is going to be allowed in PvP is very, very different though. It looks like Glowbug is going to be Storm's first double damage weakness spell. Now, there's a really cool addition to their toolkit. Right now, Calypso is a Storm spell that hits and does a double infection, and Catalan is a very, very powerful hit that does a single weakness. And these weaknesses are very, very important because Storm, other than healing, they literally have no other way to mitigate damage, and shields are much worse on a Storm anyways. So that weakness identity, I think, is both intentional and very useful for a Storm. But considering how good Rusalka already is, and we'll see, other shads are also going to be very, very useful, I think the question really becomes, are you going to use this Glowbug over Catalan? You're definitely not going to use it over Calypso, because the whole point, in my opinion, of Calypso isn't really for the fact that infections are good against healing. It's the fact that a lot of schools don't have an easy way to remove the infections. You stack up 4 infections by using 2 of these, and then you have a spell that does 2000 damage for having 4 weaknesses on your opponent. So simply as a deck space thing, I'm not actually sure Glowbug will be an easy replacement for either Calypso or Catalan. So for you to run it, you'd have to go even deeper into the weakness route of Storm. That comes with more, you know, of exposure, I guess, to schools that are good against weaknesses. So it might not be such a good choice. Speaking of shads that I think people are going to be using more than Glowbug in PvP, this is what they're going to be doing to Iron Sultan. Y'all, this is ridiculous. First off, the top hat, even though it's not a crazy big increase, it is just making a 4 pip shad, which is the best spell in game for Storm at low pips for damage. It's making it a lot better. That's really, really awesome because, you know, free damage, I don't think anyone's complaining about that on a Storm. The bottom path, this is one of the most ridiculous spells we've seen this entire week of teasers. So what does the bottom path of Iron Sultan do? It does almost 500 damage, which is already a massive amount for such a low pip shad. But the utility that it gets for being a shadow enhanced spell is ridiculous. It is a 40% weakness aura that's also school specific. So we already saw Rusalka. It's a school specific damage aura for the caster. This is a weakness aura that's also school specific. Now, weakness auras are relatively new for Storm. However, we've seen 3 different types of weakness auras that are accessible to them already. We have just a casual 15% weakness aura that, you know, everybody can learn, but Storm can use a lot better. And then you can combine it with Heket for a hit that does a minus 25% universal weakness aura. If you want to take it even one step further, for having a heal on yourself, the bottom path of Heket can actually do a minus 30% school specific weakness aura, but you need to have a heal on yourself. Now, just for having a shad, not only are you getting a school specific weakness aura, it is the most powerful weakness aura we've ever seen, a minus 40. This spell is literally demonic, y'all. It is basically saying a shad is worth you pulling 2 cards to fuse or having a heal on yourself, and it's even better. And considering we've seen a meta really evolve around, you know, side decks having at least 5 damage auras, if not more, just to like literally, you know, undo weakness auras and trap auras. Like for offensive schools, not having aura control might be the difference between winning and losing, because let's say that you have a positive damage aura and someone auras over you. That is a big swing for a school as fragile as Storm. So now you have yet another way to combat that. I honestly think this is easily the most OP Storm spell out of the bunch. A 40% weakness aura without even, you know, no condition like a healing, no condition like pulling 2 cards to fuse together. It seems way better for way less of a trade-off in terms of deck building or just pulling things or, you know, fulfilling a condition. This could be an insane shield breaker. It could be an insane move in Shrike, especially if you have a Shad going into Shrike. You don't die and you maybe break debuffs while threatening a better hit. And as long as you're not going against a school that could do an anti-aura, this could be one of the most commanding spells in game. It might reintroduce dual schooling into schools that are good against auras. Mainly right now, that would be Ice and Balance. Right, every other school, you know, they don't really have a natural answer to weakness auras, or I guess harmful auras in general. Ice and Balance do. Maybe if this is that good, those will be a more popular dual schooling option. I'm not sure. This just seems really powerful. I'm scared about this one getting spammed a little bit. Moving right along, what you see on your screen is what they're going to be doing to Sound of Musicology. Now, thankfully, unlike Glowbugs, this AoE is getting spellments, you know, it's going to get spellment path for the top path. We're looking at something that does almost 1400 damage and gives you a guaranteed 45 blade after hitting. It's an amazing, amazing way to immediately do damage. I could totally see this used in like boss fights where you kill the minion and then get another blade for your more powerful single hit that you want to do on a boss. If you're a PvE player, this is a Storm spellment for you. Guaranteed, there's no way around it. This is a massive, massive W for Storm. The bottom path, on the other hand, I would not call this a massive W. I'd call this a huge L. I don't know how they justified this one, but it is a complete stinker. For 5 pips in a Shad, it does only 645 damage, and basically it gives you 2 40% blades that are school specific. Why do I call this a stinker? Because for 5 pips, one of the pips being a Storm pip that you can literally get first round, so really not a big deal. You already have a spell that does more damage and gives you a better blade, and you don't have to use a Shad. I would never see a Storm using this, and I would probably still use Catch of the Day over this, even if I was dueling into Storm for those chromatic blades. You know, like, yes, those blades do change based on who casts them, but Catch of the Day is clearly better than the spell. I don't understand why they would expect anyone to take the bottom path of the spell seriously. Maybe this is an oversight. I just don't get it. Moving on to Dark and Stormy, this is what they're going to be doing to the 6-pip Shad from Lemuria for Storm. The top patch, just like a lot of spells that we've seen with these teasers, you could actually use spellments to increase the actual pip cost of the spell. Now, even the 8-pip Shad, it doesn't hit that much harder than the Rusalka that we've kind of gotten used to at this point, but the heal is actually really, really massive. I could totally see this being used when you're trying to solo on a Storm. I think 1350 healing with 1400 damage, really, really cool 8-pip Shad spell concept. And the bottom pad, this one is really, really interesting to me because it looks like it does a gigantic hit. It's still 900 damage for 6 pips in a Shad, but the Shad utility is going into the healing. It's a 720 health heal. Now, what you might notice though is that it's not multiple heals on you. It's just one single heal overtime on you. Now, you might be wondering, why is it that some spells give you 2 heal overtimes? Why is it that some give you 1? Why does it even matter? Right, the thing with certain schools that can leverage stuff like healing is they'll actually get spells that reward you for having more copies of heal overtimes on yourself. Now, this varies per school, but I would say the really, really big ticket item for Storm anyways is the more heals you have on and you Storm Owl out of, the more pips that you get back. What this spell does, yes, it does 1300 damage. That's great. Even at 10 pips, it's really, really good. What this spell does is, per heal overtime you have on yourself, it actually gives you 3 pips back. One of the most popular combos is to Bury Surprise, and this is a spell that gives you 2 heal overtimes, then gives you, and basically you Storm out of it, and you do 1300 damage, you get 6 pips back. You basically get 8 pips by the end of this, because you get a power pip for just naturally passing a turn. The trade-off, obviously, is that for having 2 heal overtimes on yourself, schools that do things that clear 2 heals will have more punishing heal counters. I would argue for Storm specifically, the strength of Storm outweighs the trade-off of counters being better against 2 heal overtimes. Dark and Storm being 1 heal overtime, I think it makes it much less useful as a Shad. I just don't see it being used over Bury simply because you don't really get that Storm out combo out of it. Now, the other question you might have is, why is it not 2 heal overtimes? I think there's a certain threshold in terms of amount that both heal overtimes and damage overtimes need to reach to justify that second copy. You actually really see it with spells like Elephant in action, right? So what Elephant does for clearing 1 shield, it does an overtime on the opponent, and then it basically just hits for 460 fire damage. But you might notice the 5 on it, it can actually clear more than 1 shield. It can clear up to 5, and the OT that it makes for clearing gets more powerful the more shields you clear. And Elephant hits a point after 4 shields getting cleared where it goes from 1 damage overtime to 2. And that's because the sheer amount of damage you're getting for the dot, they basically justify an extra copy. So if a heal like Dark and Stormy is only 1 copy, that means the heal itself is not powerful enough to justify that second heal overtime on you. It needs to be more than 700 or whatever it is for it to be basically a double heal overtime. In my opinion, for this spell to be even mildly competitive in PvP, the bottom path anyways, the damage needs to be a little bit lower. Transfer the value until you can hit that threshold to make it 2 heal overtime. Otherwise, this is not a spell worth using at all. I would hate to see it's such a cool spell. It's already fallen out of the meta for a while now because it's so hard to use 2 Shad. They're finally making it more accessible for a school like Storm. Why are you making it 1 heal overtime copy? It makes no sense, man. And finally, what you see on your screen is what they're going to be doing to Storm Scion. Now, the top path, ridiculous in PvE. Ridiculous. If y'all don't know how this works, for some reason, if you don't know how this works, if you don't have this in your deck when you're PvEing, all you have to do is make sure that your opponent doesn't have blades, and this spell guarantees at top, at max share top path, it'll do 2,840 damage. With an enchant, this is a 3,100 damage base spell. When spellments come out, this will be the most powerful PvE spell in game. I can't wait to use this at max tier. I think it's going to be explosive. I think obviously it gets even better in scenarios where you have someone that's with you that can remove blades if the boss or whoever you're fighting does blade. But yes, this is the new best PvE spell in the game after spellments come out. I'll say this, it is a little bit of a lackluster update in the sense that it's only 40 damage compared to what we have right now for max tiering. So yeah, it's a little iffy. And as far as the bottom path, this seems to be doing exactly what they did to Mid Scion. The actual version of the spell that's just base, as in you don't fulfill any conditions, it's actually weaker than it is in Live Realm. So sending a base Scion might not be as good as it used to be. I don't really care that much because Scion wasn't a huge part of the meta for, I mean, maybe it will be, who knows. And for getting all the spellments to max tier, you get a very, very modest, we're talking dozens of damage increase compared to what we have right now. And basically what the spell does is if you have 4 blades, it clears those 4 blades for way more extra damage on the Scion. It does like 2,000. I think blade counters are super punishing already, especially ice and death ones. They're kind of crazy. So this would only really be good against matchups that Storm isn't scared of, right? Those ice and death are the counter matchups. That's why Storm Scion is never a huge part of anyone's Storm deck. But who knows? Maybe, when the spellments come out, maybe there'll be some niche strategies that work, especially against schools that aren't as good against blades. I'm thinking like Myth and Fire. But yeah, y'all, for Storm specifically, there's some major takeaways. 1, if you're a PvEer, you're looking at some of the best new spells in the game simply for damage output. Where we get these spellments is gonna matter. It's actually very, very important. 2, the overall thing that they're doing, turning 2 Shadow Pip spells into 1 Shadow Pip, it helps Storm the absolute most. Why? Because even though they're relatively weak spells for having more of the Shadow Pip valuation put into utility, Storm is still the highest damage per Pip school. You're still looking at really, really heavy hits, and now you get the added bonus of also having some extra utility, and it's realistic to use 1 Shadow Pip spells, not 2. It looks like Storm is going to be having more tools associated both with damage auras and weakness auras, but this seems pretty lackluster in terms of buffing either their weakness or healing identity, which is really what increases your survival in the arena. This is something that I think the net output of this is just going to be a big movement of Storm towards auras more than they already are. Let me know what you guys think of all the Storm spells. Hopefully y'all enjoyed the in-depth analysis of all of them. I look forward to reading all of y'all's thoughts in the comments. Drop a like if you enjoyed, leave a sub for new, and as always, if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome. See y'all soon, and yeah.